On this Labor Day, no rest when it comes to the crisis in Syria. President Obama is fresh off a meeting with several top players in Washington, including Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham. Earlier today, on a conference call, Secretary of State John Kerry and Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel and other top officials briefed House Democrats on the evolving situation in Syria. But local Congressman Scott hosted his usual Labor Day picnic in Newport News. Senator Tim Kaine was scheduled to attend, but canceled all appearances so he could return to Washington for that meeting on Syria. 10 on your side, military reporter Art Kahn also attended today's picnic, and Congressman Scott had a lot to say and a big decision to make, Art, about Syria.
Yeah, he did, Tom. You know, the crowd was pretty thick earlier. It was a big turnout for this picnic. They're all but gone now. But, you know, until President Obama announced on Saturday that he would seek congressional approval before launching a strike on Syria, we really hadn't heard that much from Congressman Scott on the Syrian crisis. You know, Congressman Scott has consistently supported the president and his policies with regard to the budget, but remains undecided when it comes to the question of Syria. He says today, told us that there are several matters of concern to him before he's ready to sign off on an attack on Syria. There is no doubt at the White House or inside the State Department that the Assad regime used chemical weapons to kill more than 1,400 men, women, and children on August 21st.
Hair samples and blood samples have tested positive for signatures of sarin. So this case is building, and this case will build.
The proof of the use of chemical weapons is still ongoing. The United Nations hasn't taken its position yet.
And neither has Congressman Scott. He does admit the evidence is mounting against the Assad regime, but believes President Obama needs to answer questions dealing with more than the use of chemical weapons.
We have to decide what is in our national interest and whether or not American citizens will be more or less at risk if we attack somebody.
Congressman Scott worries about what he called an asymmetrical response by Syrian President Assad.
We attack with bombs and he attacks with a terrorist attack somewhere in the world or even in the United States. Then what do? Are we in a full-scale war? I don't know. There are a lot of things to consider.
The president has asked the American people to consider the consequences of doing nothing.
What message will we send if a dictator can gas hundreds of children to death in plain sight and pay no price?
An act the Secretary of State called a, quote, moral obscenity.
There are other moral obscenities. Where do you draw the line? You had 1,400 people killed here. You had 100,000 in Rwanda. We didn't do anything. I mean, you're a little selective.
Scott also believes the American response should be based on the world's commitment to holding Assad accountable for this atrocity.
I mean, if you have an international violation, there ought to be an international response. And if there's not, then we really need to consider what our response is.
Congressman Scott says we also need to consider what the Geneva Convention, what process it calls for if, in fact, another nation is found guilty of violating the ban on the use of chemical weapons. These are all things he hopes to learn before he makes his mind up and votes one way or the other for a strike on Syria. Reporting live from Newport News, Art Kahn, 10 on your side.
And several Norfolk-based ships remain in the area near Syria. The Stout, Ramage, Gravely, Mahan, and Barry are all on standby, waiting for word from Washington whether to strike or stand down. 10 on your side is committed to get you the latest information regarding the crisis in Syria. Stay tuned to Wavy News 10 and NBC News, as well as Wavy.com, for any updates on this constantly evolving story.